gives you the chance to rebut the comments that were made about you. You can't reopen the debate. So you have already said that what was said about you not to know about Schengen wasn't true, but we can therefore leave it at that. Thank you very much indeed. The next item on the agenda, colleagues, is statements from the Commission and Council on the implementation of the social pillar. On behalf of the Council, I turn to Mr. Maasikas. You have the floor, sir. And also like to say hello to Commissioner Thyssen, who's come into the chamber. But Minister, go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, honourable members, Commissioner. To start with, let me thank you for the opportunity to intervene here today on the European Pillar of Social Rights. The pillar has rightly attracted a very high level of attention. On November 17th, at the Social Summit for Fair Jobs and Growth in Gothenburg, our three institutions, the European Parliament, the Council and the Commission, proclaimed the 20 rights and principles of the social pillar. The purpose of the pillar is to serve as a guide towards more efficient social and employment outcomes, while taking into due account different socio-economic environments and the diversity of national systems. The tools for delivering on the pillar are in the hands of the Member States, the social partners, civil society, as well as the EU institutions. We must respect national competencies as well as the diversity that exists in Europe. We must all do our utmost to make the pillar a reality for our citizens. This is our shared political commitment and responsibility. The pillar sets the framework for various legislative and non-legislative initiatives, which included the first legislative proposal on work-life balance, currently under discussion in the Parliament and in the Council. The Council is also looking forward to working with you on the proposal to revise the Written Statement Directive. Further initiatives are included in the 2018 Commission Work Programme, more specifically the Social Fairness Package, with proposals on a European Labour Authority, access to social protection for atypical workers and a European Social Security number. As far as the implementation of the pillar is concerned, another very important instrument is the European Semester for Economic Policy Coordination. The European Pillar of Social Rights also ties in with the discussion on the social dimension of Europe, taking place in the framework of the broader debate on the future of Europe. During the Estonian presidency, the Council adopted political commitments to reduce gender segregation in education and employment, to facilitate independent living and to respond to the ongoing changes in the world of work. We also reached the general approach on the European Accessibility Act. Honourable members, I would like to thank the European Parliament for its strong commitment to a more social Europe. Your strong impetus helped to make the social pillar happen. We all agree on these principles. It is now time to put our values into practice. We look forward to working together as co-legislators in an endeavour to promote the social dimension hand in hand with further deepening of economic convergence, implementing and enforcing the single market in all its dimensions by June 2018, just as our heads of state or government have repeatedly called for. Thank you very much.
Grazie, Ministro.
Thank you, Mr. Maasikas. Now, on behalf of the European Commission, I turn to Commissioner Thyssen. Go ahead, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. President, dear Presidency of the Council, honourable members of Parliament. Indeed, on the 17th of November in Gothenburg, the three European political institutions proclaimed our European Pillar of Social Rights at the first social summit in 20 years. This proclamation is a unifying message to our citizens and to the world. In Europe, we share important social values and we stand ready to defend a shared vision for a fair society now and in the future. The European Parliament had indeed a major role in shaping the pillar, and I would like to thank the President of the Parliament, the Employment Committee, the President of the Employment Committee, and of course the rapporteur, Madame Rodrigues, and the shadow rapporteurs, Tom van de Kendelare, and the shadow rapporteurs of the other groups, for their steering role and political commitment to the pillar ahead of the Gothenburg summit. The pillar is our chance to reconnect Europe with its citizens. And as the Commission President rightly said, if we want to be credible, we have to deliver. The time has come to make sure that the pillar's rights and principles are effectively guiding our actions at European, at national and at regional and local level. The pillar is essentially a joint endeavour. Its implementation should entail full respect of subsidiarity and the division of competences within the Union, as well as of the role of the social partners in delivering employment policies in Member States. And this is the message that I have just sent to all ministers, social partners and other stakeholders. I strongly encourage Member States to continue their efforts to make the pillar a reality on the ground, in close cooperation with the social partners and the civil society at large. We, from our side, will make full use of the European semester. The European semester will be the key instrument to steer the process of social convergence every year. And we are starting now. The Annual Growth Survey 2018 already makes clear that the semester will be key for delivering the pillar. The Joint Employment Report includes the new social scoreboard to monitor areas covered by the pillar, such as the share of early school leavers, the youth unemployment rate, or the impact of social transfers on poverty reduction. And the employment guidelines, as you know, the legal basis for the country-specific recommendations, have been aligned with the principles of the pillar. We will now bring this forward in our bilateral contacts with Member States within the framework of the semester, where we will identify together the main challenges. Dear Members of Parliament, the Commission is already doing its part to translate the pillar into concrete initiatives. We proposed an initiative on work-life balance, and I welcome the Estonian Presidency's efforts to make progress on our proposal, and I count on you to deliver on this important file within the mandate of this Parliament. As the social partners could not agree to start negotiations for an autonomous social partner agreement next week, we will present a proposal on the revision of the Written Statement Directive. The aim of this proposal is to increase the rights for the most vulnerable workers. We want to ensure clarity for workers and employers on their contractual relationship, irrespective of the type of the contract. We are also working on a social fairness package to be launched on the 7th of March 2018, and this social fairness package will include a proposal for a European Labour Authority and one on a European social security number to ensure that European Union rules on labour mobility are enforced in a fair, a simple and an effective way. And it will also comprise an initiative on improving the access to social protection of people employed on non-standard contracts and in various forms of self-employment. Mr. President, dear Council Presidency, Members of Parliament, to achieve our aims, we need, of course, also a budget. And the negotiations on the financial programming after 2020 are, of course, crucial. The European Pillar of Social Rights should be a compass to guide us also in these negotiations. We count on the support of the Parliament for working in this direction and to make the social dimension of Europe visible also in the next MFF. Honourable Members, we can only build a fairer and a more social Europe by working together. Our common goal is to improve the life chances of every European. I count on you to help deliver on all our legislative initiatives that are implementing the pillar, and I count on all members of this House to be ambassadors of the pillar and to tell your constituents that the European Union stands up for the rights of its citizens. Thank you very much. Thank you, President.
Grazie alla commissaria Thyssen.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Thyssen. Now it's time to hear from group statesmen, and on behalf of the group of the European People's Party, Mr. van den Kendelare.
Thank you very much, President. Ladies and gentlemen, on the 17th of November in Gothenburg at the Social Summit, the European Pillar for Social Rights was signed. With the 20 principles, a foundation has been established so that not just at European level but also the member state level, a number of basic principles have been established. At the same time, there was a very strong signal sent that Europe isn't just about the economy, it's also about social affairs. And that's where we need to make progress on both fronts. That's extremely useful. The advent of digital platforms and the economic revolution that goes hand in hand with that is really wiping the floor with the established principles of our labour market. And we're seeing new jobs coming up. Old jobs, such as man or a woman at a checkout, are going to disappear. New jobs, like the Deliveroo bike couriers, are taking their places. Our social security and labour market policies need to be adjusted to fit in. And the core issue here is very straightforward. Who is going to protect people? Our answer is very clear. It's us. We have to do that. Europe and the European Parliament. We have to make sure that we don't just concentrate on fair competition, as we do when it comes to the abuse through using posted workers, but we also have to ask ourselves what the new labour market will mean for European citizens. What about pensions? What about social rights? What about digital literacy? And this is where the social pillar can show us the way. That is the function of the social pillar. It works as a compass. And I stand by the principles of the social pillar: equal access to the labour market, the right to grow old with dignity, to prepare for digital challenges. We can do a great deal more to implement this in practical ways. Thank you.
Grazie per il gruppo dei...
Thank you. On behalf of the group of the Progressive Alliances of Socialists and Democrats, Ms. Rodriguez.
Social Europe is back in the European debate and political initiative. And the proclamation of the social pillar is indeed a very important moment to make sure that the roadmap for the future of the European Union will be guided by this ambition to update our social dimension to cope with the new challenges. This is the level of ambition we should bear in mind. And we should have a second ambition, is to make sure that all European citizens, wherever they live or they work, in all member states, they can count on a powerful upward social and economic convergence, because we are still dealing with many inequalities, and without stronger cohesion there is no future for the European project. Now, after the proclamation, the time for delivery has come. And let me be precise on the expectations from S&D Group. We are now really focused on making sure that all people in employment, whatever the kind of job, they can count on two very important things. One is a transparent and decent labour contract. This is particularly important for young people. Second thing is full access to social protection all over the life cycle. And we believe these are two key pieces to build a welfare system for the 21st century. So we are now expecting the European Commission to table legislative initiatives on this once social partners could not come to an agreement. But let me also say that we also believe that updating social standards and social law is not enough. We need to redirect social policies and economic policies. And that's why the European semester is so important, because the European semester must become a powerful process to coordinate these policies for upward convergence. We appreciate the package presented by the European Commission. It moves in this direction, but let me tell you that the big test will come when member states will be confronted with big macro-social imbalances, and we need to correct the situation. Thank you.
Grazie. Per il gruppo dell'ECR.
On behalf of the ECR group, Ms. TREBESIUS. 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, President. When it comes to the labour market, then the powers and competences for this in the hands of the member state, and each member state is responsible for the kind of benefits that they can provide and what they cannot finance. And this is why in the Eurozone there is a ban on taking over liability. Obviously, every nation state, every member state has to be responsible for the kind of benefits that they can afford. And under the social pillar, to set up a European labour authority, having a European social security number and all sorts of other legislative initiatives, an attempt is being made to drag labour competences, labour market competences to the European level, which would require a change to the founding treaties, because when it comes to the responsibility for costs, this is going to be shifted to the European level. And the principle of self-responsibility and liability is being undermined. And it means then that powers are going to be, of the member states are going to be replaced. And in the Eurozone, this would mean transfers between member states, and social rights obviously would lead to transfers, quite rightly. And of course, that would mean competences being imposed from above. And this is totally counter to what was promised to people from the outset of the Union. We're talking about welfare and being guaranteed by the member states. So obviously the social pillar is not just a catalogue of ideas for member states. There are certain concerns that are set out in 20 principles, are legally binding, and implementation of this obviously is in the hands of the national governments. But if you take a look at the choice of words, rights and principles, then it's possible that these could then be one would derive from this certain claims and demands and this would then perhaps could be taken before the courts. And so we have to be careful about the splitting of these powers, and the ECR is therefore somewhat sceptical about all of this, and we are against a heavy social model of this kind. Subsidiarity and self-responsibility are our principles.
Mr. Calvet-Chambon, on behalf of the ALDE Group, 2 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. President. In French, good afternoon, Madam Commissioner. It's always nice to debate with you. But I'm going to go back to Spanish now. I think you can say that, fortunately, 2017 is the year of social issues in the European Parliament and in the European institutions in general. Finally, people have realised that we weren't simply a bailout body on something dealing solely with finances, but something dealing with stuff that European citizens think is very important. Also, it's the year where the battle against inequality has really begun, and it's the year where something very important happened, that in the European semester the social aspect, social values, measuring inequality has been brought in with an idea of correcting them. But of course we want something tangible, we want results, and you've already done some things are already underway, and you don't need to ask us to help you. We are going to help you. We are going to play an active role in developing all of this, but we're going to be tough as well. I think it would be a good thing for the priority issues to be highlighted and an action plan to be brought in, rather than doing things in a piecemeal, off-the-cuff kind of way. That'll show that we're being responsible, preparing a new convention where the social dimension will be far less overshadowed by subsidiarity. You've heard really about where the problems are coming from. Also, I would say that should never prevent free circulation of individuals or free competition through having in dodgy pricing. But citizens like us, through social policy, can be helped, and so financial solidarity is important too. Thanks very much, says the President. On behalf of the GUE group, Ms. Zimmer, 1.5 minutes, please.
Commissioner, just a quick reply to Mrs. Trebesius. No, I don't know if you'd have the same self-assuredness and arrogance if talking to thousands of poor people and homeless people, if you could argue in their faces that the European Union should still be one in which business and the banks are the first to be served, and the actual cohesion of the Union is not something anybody's interested in. You were appealing for solidarity to be given up on, that solidarity be cancelled, whether it be in Greece, Portugal, in many countries of Eastern Europe, where people should have an opportunity, should have prospects for the future, and they're just as important as the people in our own countries who we're fighting for, to give them the social help they need. And as that's the case, maybe I could just point out, or address just one point, because at the moment I think basically we're like a dog chasing its tail. If we assume, or rather if it's been decided that there's going to be a transfer of the fiscal pact into union law, I think that that does not constitute an improvement of our situation given the contradictions we're facing. As long as the priorities for the European semester are focused on not going beyond the budget and to reduce payments, especially when it comes to social payments, education payments, health payments, if that's what we're going to do, we're always going to be in conflict. Now, I support any endeavour to make sure that the social security systems in the member states be strengthened, but that could be done with specific support of the European Union. We don't need agreements and treaties. We don't need to break treaties. We don't need to break subsidiarity. We just have to assume our common solidarity and responsibility, and I'd support them.
Monsieur Lambert.
Thank you. Mr. Lamberts.
Thank you, President. If we take a look at the definition and implementation of this policy and its actions, then the European Union is taking account of the demands to promote employment and to guarantee adequate social protection, fighting social exclusion, and also to guarantee a high level of education and training and health protection. And this, dear colleagues, is the wording of Article 9 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union. And we are extremely happy that finally the social pillar has been officially validated by the heads of state and government in the European Union. If all the rights that are listed in this document, a right to equality, a right to education and health, a right to decent work and salary and wages and social protection, if all of this were properly implemented, then the European Union would have made considerable progress on the path to shared prosperity. But the catalogue of rights, for the time being, is just a declaration of intent. And we cannot see many people doing a lot to actually translate all of this into binding legislation so that we can meet these objectives. We saw this with the 2020 strategy. We put a figure on the number of poor people in Europe, and only a couple of years away from 2020, we've seen that the number of poor people has gone up by 6 million, and it'll probably go down to the levels of 2010. People will say that the best way to guarantee social rights is employment, and the Commission was happy to see that the unemployment rate has gone down to its levels before the crisis, but at what price? 0-hour contracts, and we know that wages are very low and there's social exclusion. Even the European Bank has realized this. And you can only have, if you want to solve the crisis, you need rates of employment which are twice those of unemployment. We have to make sure that we don't have poor workers, and we have to ensure that we don't do things that are going against the requirements of the social pillar. And we feel that some of the budget rules are counterproductive. And then, of course, we have a fiscal and a social competition between the member states, and you add to that weakening of collective bargaining procedures in member states, and then a free trade treaty which is to the favour of multinational companies. And this leads to two things: a reduction of expenditure and investment in the public sphere, and secondly, a reduction in salaries and levels of social protection. And I'm finishing. without questioning the questioning these and doubting these political questions, it's going to be difficult for us to turn the social pillar into a reality. Thank you.
Onorevole Agea.
Thanks very much, Ms. Agea, on behalf of the EFDD group. 3 minutes. Thank you, Mr. President. Madam Commissioner, colleagues, in 2015, in this House, President Juncker from the European Commission put forward the idea of having a social pillar. On the 17th of November, 2 years later, in a very high-flown ceremony in Gothenburg, he talked about the fact that we had really a container now, a beautiful kind of vase, which we now have to fill with measures that will work and proposals that are viable. Something should guarantee social justice, that will guarantee hope for all of those citizens who, in the European Union today, see their rights being less and less well protected. The key areas such as wages, employment, housing. So we have a commitment to make an important task, which is that we make out of this basis, with not much in it, that we fill it with real proposals that will work. The Commission's got some ideas for directives. They should be something on which we can build to give real responses to our citizens. Europe has now a thirst for justice and a thirst for hope. So please put proposals, legislative proposals, in black and white, which will give real meaning to this. Let's commit ourselves to meeting the hopes of our citizens. Parliament's already said that we need this pillar, which will level up as far as social provisions in the European Union are concerned. Ms. Rodriguez's comments were extremely important, and I'll never tire of saying that a guaranteed European minimum wage needs to be an effective measure which will allow the millions of our citizens who live excluded and in poverty the chance to have a dignified life guaranteed to them. Levelling up can be done. The idea that the rules don't apply to everybody is just wrong. To Ms. TREBESIUS, let me say that I'm from a country which has a reputation in your mind which is probably not very favourable. But when your country decides to take on the responsibility for macroeconomic imbalances which have a huge impact on other states, then what can we say? We need to level up and we need social justice. The rules need to apply to everybody. My country will apply them because it's only fair, but it's only fair that other countries do the same thing. There are all sorts of ways in which economies are damaged, and it's important that the countries doing so agree to put an end to those policies which do damage the economies of their fellow members. It's not a deliberately controversial comment, but I really believe that solidarity is a principle on the basis the European Parliament was founded, and it's something which we really should keep complying with. We're nearly at the end of the political groups. From the ENF, Ms. ZIJLSTRA, for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. President, the Ministers of Social Affairs have established 20 principles as the social pillar. They're socialist ones that can't be paid for and remove people's freedom, trampling on rights in terms of establishing wages, pensions, and you got the trade unions back in power. Now, the socialist ministers might strive for socialist principles, but it's worse. These are now become EU principles and soon EU values, and they'd have to be part of our national identity. We'd lose the competence over that. With these socialist policies becoming EU ones, it will be illegal to have any differing views striven for at national level. And that would be the new religion that we have to bow down to. Am I the only one who thinks that things are getting worse and worse?
Thank you. From the non-attached members, Mr. Zarianopoulos, for 1 minute. With the so-called social rights pillar, the European Union is continuing to show its hypocrisy. It's basically about making employment more flexible and hiding real unemployment levers, making these bad kinds of jobs, these casual jobs, the norm. Everything is actually going to be levelled down. Women's rights will be less well respected. People's rights, workers' rights will be less well respected. Salaries will go down. Everything will be done in the chase of profits and competition. We can see that the social networks will be broken up little by little, and the social partners and trade unions will be listened to less. This isn't a pillar of rights, it's simply a pillar of social barbarism and poverty, and workers will not put up with this. This is part of the dirty work being done by the Syriza government and ANEL in Greece and Cyprus, and we know what's going on. And people are having to live with this, but they won't put up with it much longer. Thanks very much, says the President.
Allora, adesso apriamo il dibattito.
Now we have backbenchers, and the first is Mr. Casa, 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, President. The structure of labour is changing fast, and this brings with it a number of issues that need to be addressed. We need to understand that there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution for all European countries, even though we do face common challenges. For instance, one challenge is that the challenges that workers face every day are our challenges, so it is our duty to ensure that our citizens have decent jobs with easy access to their own personal development, to access to skills and modernization of our companies. For the Work-Life Balance Directive, I believe the directive, although it is an extremely ambitious one, is one that is achievable. I do believe that in order to achieve the balance between economic development and our citizens' needs, we need goodwill on every side, because ultimately everybody is going to benefit. So a European pillar of social rights is going to put the social dimension and people's needs on the forefront of the European agenda. And so member states all have a responsibility to shoulder, and they also should have the will to work hand in hand with us. I want to conclude by thanking our shadow rapporteur, Ton, Mrs. Rodriguez, and other shadow rapporteurs for the excellent work they do for us in this Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Ms. Jongerius.
Thank you, President. The European Pillar of Social Rights is an important model of how the European Union is fighting for the rights of their citizens in a rapidly changing world. Well, according to President Juncker at least. And indeed, President, the social pillar is a new approach in the history of Europe. Nevertheless, I and many of my S&D colleagues in the EMPL committee are worried about whether the social pillar is actually this model. Is it where we are championing the rights of our citizens? The pillar is meant to lead to better access to social security for all, for better parental leave, better work conditions for employees in the platform economy. But in planning the reform of the EMU, no account is being taken of the social pillar, and the joint declaration that's going to be signed doesn't mention the social pillar at all. And in the 2018 Commission work programme, there's more focus on economic ideas than on social ideas. And that's before I even mention the problem of competencies, the overlap between the Commission and the Member States. I think you understand what my concerns are, not just mine, many other colleagues as well. It's high time that there are specific measures that so many Europeans would like to see. The European Union is too much of a market and is doing too little for the man on the street. And following the Gothenburg summit, that should not be the case. We should have changed. I hope we can start bringing an end to this pointing fingers, the Commission at the Member States and vice versa. Because the Commission also has to do its homework. And looking at the Council, and indeed my own Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, I would say signing a document in Gothenburg doesn't come free of charge. There has to be follow-up in specific terms. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Wisniewska, 1 minute, please.
Yes, thank you very much, President. Honourable colleagues, if we take a look at the European Pillar of Social Rights, this is an action to try and strengthen the social dimension of the European Union, and that is heading in the right direction, because the European Union is the union of citizens, it's a union of people. However, we would have to stress that the social pillar should be seen as a road map. And so it's good that this takes a non-legislative form. It should support actions to favour the labour market, social protection, but at the same time it should respect national competitions and the principle of subsidiarity, because it's the member states who are responsible for building up the social rights and social principles. And the European Union can only serve as a support and a help. And I would like to take this opportunity to draw your attentions to a very successful programme that's been carried out by the Polish government by increasing we've increased wages, brought down unemployment. We have our Rodzina 500+, Family 500+, programme in our country, and this means that Poland is a country that has taken the lead when it comes to tackling poverty, and you should follow our example.
Selimovic.
Thanks. Mr. Selimovic, please.
President, the EU is on the 5th year of the growth, economic recovery. 250 million people are more at work. So yes, it is time to fix the roof when the sun is shining, and some improvement of the necessary living and working conditions, gender equality, etc. is necessary. Nevertheless, Commissioner, I feel that the social pillar might be just partly about it. The bigger part is about minimising the extreme right parties. We have realised that they are creating us problems in every single European country, making it impossible to form the government, spreading xenophobia, etc., which are the serious problem. And therefore we started to fight them by closing the borders and starting to be protectionistic. I feel this is the wrong way to go. It might jeopardise the growth, it might jeopardise the openness and mobility, and it might end up but not minimising the extreme right. Then we have a double problem. The social dimension is a right strategy if we want the EU to be something more than a single market, but do not let it be nationalism and protectionism. We need openness and growth, and we need to protect it. Thank you very much.
C'è una blue card per lei.
There's a blue card, Mr. Selimovic. Will you accept it, sir? Yes, go ahead. Ask a question, please.
Thank you. I noticed in your speech you were talking about this social chapter as being an important tool to be used against political parties in their own countries. Do you think that that's the primary purpose of legislation and ideas coming out of Strasbourg and Brussels, to interfere with the democratic process and to combat parties that you personally don't agree with?
Thank you very much for the question. As I said, the social pillar is necessary to fix the things that haven't been fixed. By minimising the influence of extreme right parties is not something that I will be sorry about. And this might be done, I will be happy. But the problem with that is, as I said, that we cannot let it happen to be protectionism and nationalism by our own. We have to keep the openness, we have to keep the growth, and we have to fight for it. Thank you very much.
Grazie, onorevole Kuneva.
Thanks, Mrs. Kuneva. 1 minute, madam. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. Minister, Mr. Commissioner, colleagues, the social pillar, for 2 years now, 99% of European citizens have been waiting for it, but there's no sign of it actually being applied. If we are going to apply the pillar and we are going to sanction those who don't respect it, we need legislation, both in the European Union and at member state level. How is that going to happen? What method are you going to find so that we can oblige member states to apply social policies which are based on the content of the social pillar? And let me ask you further, how are you going to apply Article 9 of the treaty? How are you going to check European policies which have social implications? Colleagues, we need to apply binding social indicators, and we need to bring in the pillar. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you, says the President. Ms. Reintke, 1.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, President. What happened 60 years ago in Europe constitutes a wonder, a miracle. People who recently had been fighting each other, who should have hated each other, came together and established the project that became the European Union. If in the coming 60 years this project of European Union and coming together is to be built on, then we have to prove the same vision that people had 60 years ago. And I think a central point will be, if we manage to generate more social justice within the European Union, and the social pillar of rights is an initial important step, but we have to go further than that. We need a legally binding document on social rights that all EU citizens would enjoy. We need more proposals for laws, for example, a directive on the minimum income, to show people that the European Union is coming up with social ideas as well. And 60 years ago we had something written in the treaty, equal pay between men and women. We're still so far from that objective. It is high time that the Commission actually starts taking measures on this in law. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thanks much. Mr. Etheridge, 1.5 minutes, please.
Thank you. The social pillar, yet more lefts talking about rights. A wonderful example of the superstate trying to control every aspect of our lives. Interference in every single way. Terms like social protection, economic convergence, and it's all tied into the single market. Well, so the Europhiles and faint-hearts back in the UK, when they tell us about soft Brexit and staying in the single market, what they really mean is staying in this, having this kind of stuff imposed upon us and told what we can and can't do. Control over our lives. No say for the national parliament. What this is about is no control over our personal working lives, no control over our businesses, no control over our society. The answer that must ring clear, certainly from the United Kingdom to this, and I would urge all of our friends in Europe to say the same, is no, no, no. Only a true and clean Brexit for the United Kingdom will allow us a true independent democracy, and we will then free the individual from the ever-growing, ever-grasping, deepening clutches of this superstate.
Onorevole Bilde, prego.
Mr. Bilde, 1.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. President. Obviously, in principle, we support the idea of non-negotiable social standards in European countries. And instead of the ideas of prosperity and full employment, which it promised us, European Union has got 119 million people at risk of social inclusion and over 20 million unemployed people. 1 million new people have become poor in France in the last year, and the situation is only getting worse because of increasing instability at work because of what the Commission euphemistically calls atypical contracts. There's more casualisation and a new class is being created. Poor people actually in work are 9% of the active population. Trying to achieve social standards that are the same throughout Europe will remain a dead letter when we basically end up levelling down among member states because state or salary differences go from a ratio of 1 to 10. The Commission's unwilling to grasp the nettle and treat the causes of this. And having workers in their social system of the country of origin, that's the main cause of social dumping. Once again, Brussels is complaining about the effects that it actually causes itself, and is acting against the will of the people. Thanks very much. Mr. Rollin, go ahead. 1.5 minutes. Ms. Rollin, I beg your pardon.
20 ans qu'il nous...
Thank you very much. We needed a new social summit. The last one before Gothenburg was Luxembourg, so Gothenburg was long overdue, and some people have been asking themselves the question, the social pillar, is this just a communication operation? But I don't think we should be asking that question. We do not have the choice, nor do we have the right. The social pillar has to represent a window of opportunity, the opportunity to relaunch the idea of a social Europe. And this will only work if the member states do what they should do. And it's essential that they assume their responsibilities. The construction of Europe cannot continue unless there is a true social commitment. And this means that we have to place the economic, everything that's at stake economically and socially at the same level. Mr. Juncker has pleaded for a AAA rating. So let's get on with the work. We need a roadmap which clearly sets out the legislative initiatives and with the necessary resources allocated. The first step would be to perhaps reform the written statement directive. And then, of course, we would have to take a look at the mobility of salaried workers to make so that we can properly then coordinate social security systems. But there are too many women, too many young people, too many disabled workers, too many older people, too many migrants who suffer from precarity. And it's absolutely essential that we have cooperation across the member states so that we can set up proper coordination mechanisms and financial instruments for all these policies. And that is where there is value added. Social Europe is necessary, it's essential for the future of the European Union. Thank you.
Onorevole Lopez, prego.
Mr. Lopez, 2 minutes, please. Thanks very much, Mr. President. Now that the European Union is getting a small amount of optimism back in light of the economic recovery, time has come to try to heal the deep, deep scars that the recession has left. Social scars which are a single cause, really. Inequality. Inequality between countries, divergence when we're supposed to be bringing people closer together, and also inequality within individual countries that's generated pockets of poverty and fear and uncertainty, of disquiet. And we're seeing this, of course, the results of this in the elections held in the member states in the last few years. And at a time of social breakup, the European institutions have now finally come up with a pillar for social rights. That's a step in the right direction. It's positive, but it's not really hugely impressive. It's trying to provide opportunities and social protection and more jobs. For us in the Socialist Group, this was once the heart of the whole European project, but we need this heart to have a body. We need it to have binding legislation, public policies and instruments and the requisite budget to allow us to make it happen. We need to stop the creeping casualisation and levelling down of salaries, to deal with gender inequality, to deal with these pockets of juvenile unemployment that I mentioned before. Also, when it comes to the European semester, the way that European economic policy can be coordinated, well, we're disappointed there that the Commission's legislative agenda is very unimpressive. This is going quite possibly to be another source of frustration for citizens, because we have a chance before us, as well as the need to regain legitimacy for Europe and stop being seen as a cold tool of globalisation, as a rather a warm hearth that protects people's social rights. Thanks very much, Mr. Hodge. 1 minute.
Yes, thank you very much, President. The European Pillar of Social Rights has 3 categories of tasks: equal opportunities and access to the labour market, and honest work and social protection. And obviously this is a very good document, and what is important is that this document is going to allow us to implement and apply social diversity across the member states. And I think it should be seen as a signpost, a roadmap, rather than imposing certain social standards. The document is in its own right the European response to globalization, and we have to try and eliminate disparities. And obviously we have to be seen as a model of social rights, but we would be against any attempt on the part of the Commission to unify social security systems across some of the member states of the European Union. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Marinho y Pinto. 1 minute, please. Mr. President, Madam Commissioner, the European Social Pillar is really the reification of the spirit of Europe, the idea of progress and the desire to keep moving forward and making things better, trying to improve people's lives. The European spirit was born in the Battle of Salamina and the battle against obscurantism. It comes from Roman law, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and the triumph of scientific rationalism over myth and superstition. And only 7% of the world's population live in Europe, but we produce more than half of the world's wealth and spend half of social expenditure in Europe. Europe, in peace, in freedom and in democracy, has reached levels of collective well-being that can't be matched in any other time or any other place in history. And the spirit of Europe very soon will allow us, through the economic recovery, will free people from the alienating nature of work and will allow us to continue to develop scientifically, economically and culturally. Thank you. Ms. Kari, 1 minute, please.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, now, if you are unemployed after the next election, you can come to Copenhagen and work in a wealthy family for 22 kroner an hour, or you can harvest vegetables for 24 kroner an hour, because workers all over Europe are under great pressure and their conditions are worse than they've ever been, also because of the internal market, which allows employers to move workers around and place them wherever it's most convenient. And if they fall down from scaffolding and get hurt, well, they won't get much help, because the financial packages and the financial semester has made it impossible to do much to help them. And therefore it sounds very hollow when we introduce a social pillar, because the social rights and social protection is part of the basic treaties of the European Union. So a social pillar are just nice words, and if there are things they don't need in market gardening or in scaffold workings, well, it's nice words. They need proper rights which are really enforced.
Thank you. Mr. Urtasun, 1 minute, please.
Thank you. The scars of austerity are enormous. 20 million people unemployed in the European Union, 25% at risk of poverty, and contracts which are becoming far more precarious, far more temporary, and young people who have no hopes in the future. And we have a problem of what political option to take. We have certain fiscal standards that have been adopted. There's an institutional problem as well, and we can see that our various tax systems are competing against each other. So we have a social pillar, which is a very good idea, Commissioner, but we're somewhat concerned about what lies behind this. You've referred to the review of the written statement directive, but what about the directive or the family life balance package, where we know that the maternity directive has been withdrawn? So, and what about this employment agency, the social security number? These are interesting initiatives, but not enough. What about minimum income and minimum salary directives? I think we ought to try and be a little more ambitious.
Bay, prego, 2 minuti.
Mr. Bay, 2.5 minutes, please.
Chers collègues,
Ladies and gentlemen, at the Social Summit in Gothenburg on the 17th of November, there were 20 points or principles that were meant to establish this European social pillar. These fantastic and beautiful statements are what Europeans do best. But what about this minimum salary, this minimum income? 6 states don't have a minimum salary set in law. Denmark, Italy, Cyprus, Austria, Finland and Sweden. And amongst the other member states, they have massive disparities. In France, the guaranteed minimum wage is around 1,500 euros, more or less the same as in the Netherlands, Belgium or Germany. In Luxembourg, it's about 2,000 euros, but it's less than 500 euros in no fewer than 9 countries, going down to 275 euros in Romania. How can we not believe that harmonisation will end up in levelling down? And we need to go beyond these disparities. You can't just make them disappear with a wave of your magic wand. And the basic problem here with this catalogue of good intentions is the absence of questioning what's going on. The Commission is claiming to bring solutions to problems that they're basically responsible for generating. Budgetary austerity, competition that is unfair between different parts of Europe, posting of workers, a single currency, the rigidity of which is really penalising the economies of many of our countries, and of course getting rid of border controls. We used to talk about the social charter, now we're talking about the pillar. The Commission, in this way, is trying to provide some sort of illusion of stability, but the European Union, as you know well, is more fragile than ever. In a recent interview with a Belgian daily paper, Mrs. Commissioner, you said that we want to get rid of unfair competition. So you accept that there is unfair competition, but signing these free trade agreements all over the place is not going to help. I know that mobility is part of your portfolio. I know it's a bit of a mode word, it's in vogue. But we can see that the dogma of free movement of goods and people is something that is ruining our country slowly but surely. You intended to have recommendations for member states in social policy, and you said there are problems, rightly so, that there's been a drop in the birth rate in Europe. Mr. Juncker never fails to come up with encouraging immigration as a false answer to this problem. You should rather try and provide incentives for people to have children, which then our nations could put in practice.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thanks very much, Mr. Lavrieux.
Non lo vedo.
Actually, I can't see Mr. Lavrieux in his seat, so Ms. Ulfskog.
Non c'è.
She's not here either. Ms. Stevens, go ahead, madam. 1 minute.
Dank u wel, voorzitter.
Thank you very much, President, Madam Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, we need to make headway in Europe. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And yes, you have to get down to brass tacks. We need to make sure that we have a fair Europe, and a social pillar, I think, is something that could be a good step in the right direction. And member states need to be encouraged to make sure that social progress is made. Real social initiatives are ones that I can support wholeheartedly, but, and it's an important but, they can't be just an excuse to try and extend the powers of Europe to the detriment of what's set out in the treaties for member states. Subsidiarity and proportionality are extremely important principles. These make sure that social policy is put at the right level, at the necessity of the citizens. A one-size-fits-all policy is a one-size-fits-none result. This is an understanding that you have to let come through to your understanding, and this is why I think we don't see enough social in the social pillar.
Thank you very much. Thank you for respecting your speaking time. Ms. López Bermejo Paloma, 1 minute, please.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, President. If we take a look at the European social pillar, we don't really want great sweeping statements which are empty of content. We want it to be effective. We want it to contribute to improving working conditions and the living conditions of our workers. We've put forward, we want several proposals and suggestions to be heeded from the European Parliament. Listen to the legislative ideas from the trade unions, for example, the reform of the written statement directive so that all workers can see that their work conditions and working conditions are properly recognised. We have to boost a framework directive for minimum income, carry out controls and inspections which do away with bogus self-employed, and also tackle letterbox companies in the European Union. These are things that we've been demanding for a long time now, and they can't wait till the next legislature. The Council and the Commission have to ensure that acquired rights under the social pillar, the right to a decent wage, the right to decent work, and the right to collective bargaining and social protection be interpreted in the same way as the rights that are recognised and enshrined in the Charter. They have to be binding rights, and we also have to align the social acquired rights with those at the international level.
Mr. Kosha, 1.5 minutes, please.
Üdvözlöm, hogy az Európai Unió a szociális jogokkal.
Well, I'd like to welcome the fact that the European Union has started establishing some fundamental principles in terms of the social sphere. I'm convinced that an efficient economic policy is something that has to follow decent social policy. The social protection of citizens can be maintained, but only if you have a decent economic backdrop to that. If you look at sustainably economic growth and you're generating jobs, then you can spend money on social ends and people will benefit from that. And this concerns people with disabilities as well. For years we've been underscoring the fact that these are also employees. Hungary, I think, is treading the right path in this respect since 2010. Our unemployment is at 4%, and since the political change back in 1989, we are looking at over 4.5 million people who are in employment, and that's much more than was the case before. We have 78% of the active population in work, which is a few percentage points more, 3.5 I think, more than France. But the work still remains to be done. We have to do everything for our citizens.
Thank you. Ms. Blinkevičiūtė, 1.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. President. Indeed, colleagues, we now have a social pillar. We've got these 20 principles which define how social Europe will look in the future. I'm very pleased that we've finally understood that Europe has no future unless we invest in our citizens, in social policy. And I'd like to thank Commissioners Thyssen and Jourová for having come up with the directive on the professional private life balance issue. I'd also now like to address Council. Why isn't this directive one of your priorities for 2018? Can we not agree on the implementation of this directive? Parental leave is another issue. This is something that should be paid just as the Commission proposed. So let me ask the the presidency, the incoming presidency, the member states to do something. We need to bear this issue in mind. Europe's demographic situation means we need to do something about this. Commissioner Thyssen, we in the S&D group have said time and again that we need to take the 20% of Europe's children who are living in poverty out of poverty. We have more need than ever for a European children's guarantee and a European youth guarantee, and we need that as we bring in the social pillar. It would be a very fine initiative.
Welfare tourism and social dumping have been some of the pillars we have seen in politics after the European Union began meddling in national affairs. Welfare money being sent out of Denmark to other countries are a consequence of EU meddling. And with this social pillar, we are now seeing yet another attack on the social welfare system of the individual countries, and I'm sure that the European Court of Justice will use this as one more weapon in its illegal attacks on our economic policies and social policies. So we must say very clearly and loudly no to the EU moving further into the internal workings of the national states. Taxpayers in individual countries should pay for their own citizens and not for all of Europe.
Onorevole Pimenta Lopez, prego.
Mr. Pimenta Lopez, 1 minute, please. Thank you, President. The 20 principles set out under the title of social pillar are just attempt to whitewash European policies and try to level down labour protection with things that ostensibly support them but actually run counter to them. The attempt is really to just support the present European policy, because a real European social policy isn't in line, isn't compatible with the semester, with militarisation, securitisation, the constant attacks on sovereignty and the right of peoples for self-development. It's tailored for those policies which simply try to fail to address the problems that Europe has. A proper social Europe will only come in with proper unstinting defence of the workers of Europe, fair wages, proper redistribution of wealth, social protection with universal high-quality public services available to all, and proper health and education services. It's not compatible with the principles of the European Union as it exists at the moment. Thank you.
Minuto e 30.
Mr. Pirinski, 1.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, President.
Signor Presidente. Signora
Thank you, President. Commissioner. Recently, I myself have had an opportunity to meet groups who are fighting extreme poverty. And despite the fact that they feel that the social pillar is a very important step, they see it as a mix of hope and skepticism. And we know, of course, that what was decided in Gothenburg is the expression of the will of the European institutions and also of the member states to try and make progress and advance towards a fairer and a more just European Union, a more social European Union. But we have created very high expectations, Commissioner, and my fear is that we're not going to be able to meet these expectations. And I think what we have is a political compromise of all the member states to try and highlight and set social aspects as priorities in their policies. But obviously this does require shared responsibility on the part of all the institutions, including the social partners. Very many member states that have social support and social aid, but if we can't have a greater community budget, which would be desirable, then what we are going to have to do is try and improve the support and the aid that already exists to make sure that the money does go to those of our citizens who are most excluded. And for that, Commissioner, we need help and support from the NGOs who are working together with the most vulnerable citizens and who work together with people who live in poverty, because the knowledge of the NGOs is absolutely key to ensure that the policies are properly tailor-made to tackle the problems.
Sorry, the screen isn't working properly. So now it's Mr. Pirinski's turn. Go ahead, sir, 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, President. President, Commissioner, Minister, last November 17, the Presidents of Parliament, Council and Commission personally and solemnly proclaimed the European Pillar of Social Rights. Its articles state that delivering on the pillar is a shared political commitment and responsibility, while for the proclaimed principles and rights to be legally enforceable, they first require dedicated measures and legislation. It now seems, however, that the Commission considers this to commit principally the Member States. President Juncker, in co-presenting the way forward on November 28th, stated that, quote, "You can be sure that the European Commission will continue to play a strong role in this endeavour." How? Notably through the country-specific recommendations in the European semester process. But this is woefully inadequate. The joint declaration on EU's 2018-19 legislative priorities just being adopted mentions only at the very end, and almost as an afterthought, that progress is also needed on social protection and social rights, referring to the 20 pillar principles. More, the social fairness package promised by the Commission as a concrete follow-up on the pillar has totally disappeared. This sort of delivery has shown the whole pillar exercise to be no more than a feeble excuse for further aggravating austerity, including by injecting the so-called fiscal pact into the treaties, thus in actual practice delivering another severe blow to social Europe. Do not deceive yourself, the people will not fail to notice.
Grazie. Onorevole Sulik, prego.
Thank you. Mr. Sulik, 1 minute, please.
Ďakujem pekne. Právo na celoživotné.
Thank you very much. The right for lifelong learning or right for personalized protection in case of unemployment. These are not rights but entitlements or claims. The difference between a right and a claim is that a right, for example, right for freedom of expression does not cost anything, whereas claims or entitlements cost you billions and billions of euros. This is nothing new. Populists throughout Europe for many, many years had promised before election, and then after election they guaranteed certain claims that are now causing huge indebtedness. You can see it best in Greece. The populists promised 100 months of severance pay and huge pension payments, a lot of rights, but in reality only claims, entitlements, and they have thus gotten Greece into bankruptcy. But the same applies in case of Spain, Italy, Portugal. They are chasing the public indebtedness from one record to the next because populist politicians have promised heaps to the population that no one is able to pay. And in Greece you can see how difficult it is for people to give up their rights and how ready they are to go on the streets and strike. That's why I suggest the European Commission not to chase the Europe into socialism and bankruptcy. Thank you very much.
Grazie. Onorevole González.
Thank you, Ms. González Peñas. Tanya, 1 minute, please.
Gracias. Yes, thank you very much, President. For the first time in 10 years, the European Commission has found the word social again. And we're very happy about this because it means these recipes for dismantling the social state, the welfare state, have just led to greater precarity, greater inequality and more poverty. If we take a look at the proposals for the social pillar, there are some very progressive initiatives, the Work-Life Balance Directive, but obviously that's going to have quite a series of improvements made to it so that we have a proper work-life balance and a better share out of tasks between the genders. But some of the other initiatives are not so new because we can see that these are in the European Social Charter, and some of the new legislative proposals are essentially directives which need reviewing and revising. In Europe, we see that wages are still very low, that inequality is increasing, that it doesn't seem possible to create quality jobs or do away with social justice. Unless we have an about turn in terms of our approach and our policies, then in the European Union we're going to be talking about a completely empty social pillar.
Thank you. Mr. Hetman, 1.5 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you very much, President. If we take a look at social development and improving working and living conditions, this is intrinsically linked to economic development, and we can only achieve this if we link a policy supporting investment, which leads to increased jobs. And we have to also support initiatives leading to greater social protection, doing away with disparities between regions. We feel that the European pillar of social rights and also it has to be linked to economic governance under the European semester. We have to send a clear signal to the Member States that the social aspects and employment aspects are obviously closely linked to economic governance. If you take a look at the most recent report on economic growth, we can see that there is a positive trend. There's a drop in unemployment and poverty. The European economy has returned to the path of growth, and it's the right time to try and increase effectiveness, performance and investment. And we have in such a way that we can improve working conditions. And obviously what we have to do, the task of the European Union is to support the Member States in order to increase that growth and bring about greater social justice. And obviously they're responsible for carrying out these tasks under the pillar. I very much hope that the Commission is going to base itself on tried and tested tools like the European Social Fund. We know that 1/4 of its funding comes from structural funds and also leads to further investment. And what is important is that we speed up our work on the European Skills Programme. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Regner, 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much, President. Commissioner, social Europe is something that people like to shout about from the soapbox, but it's about delivering results now. We can't just watch in the way in which prosperity is falling apart. We can't accept that European rights are being trampled on, for example, looking at what's going on in Austria and the horrific 12-hour day. And we can't look away when people in Europe are losing faith in the dream and that they think that future generations will not have as good a life as their current generation. We need to save the situation. We need to act. The social summit in Gothenburg was really just the start of things. We have to make sure that these provisions apply across the board for all European countries. It's only with minimum income, minimum standards and the prohibition on wage and social dumping can we stop the disparities between West and East and North and South.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ms. Clune.
Thank you, President and Commissioner. And I think this is a very important element of European legislation and European policy, and it shows that Europe is leading the way towards a modern social economy. And we need a pillar of social rights for our social market economy to be successful and competitive now and in the future as well, and that the living and working conditions in Europe converge for the better for all. And the world of work and our societies are changing fast, as with globalisation, digitalisation and changing work patterns, and also with communications. We have plenty of opportunities, but we have also challenges, and we need to shape these developments and to make very good use of them. Most of all, I think we need to make sure that economic and social developments go hand in hand, and that Europe continues to be a world-class place to live and to work. And the proclamation of social rights by the social partners is very much welcome. And I also think the social scoreboards are very welcome, because we know there is a wide divergence between Member States when it comes to social rights. Yet we must respect individual states to make decisions for themselves. I think it's very important that we set standards and lead by example, and indeed set minimum rates. If we look at maternity leave, the highest amount is over 50 weeks, and yet some countries paternity leave is not yet legislated for. I believe issues such as this and the work-life balance are extremely important, particularly from a female point of view. Paternity leave, work-life balance, they encourage women to participate in the workplace, to participate in education, and all in all increasing the social content and the social progress of our European states. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Schuster for 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much, President. Jacques Delors, previous President of the Commission, knew that nobody would fall in love with the single market. If you want to get support from the public, then you have to make it clear that Europe will help people, will improve their situation, not worsen it. Unfortunately, over the past years, that hasn't always been the case. Many people link the EU, above all, with an approximation to globalization that only helps the few and actually damages regions. And that is one of the reasons, by the way, for the increasing nationalism that unfortunately provides no prospects whatsoever. That's why the new discussions about the social dimension of Europe is so important. However, fine words butter no parsnips. We need European measures. We need to look at the posting of working directive, which will prevent social and wage dumping in an effective way. We have to have protection for children so that children have affordable access to housing and healthcare, but also we need a different economic and financial policy which will finally get to grips with fighting unemployment and above all youth unemployment. So these soapbox speeches have to be turned into laws and actual deeds.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ms. Sander. 1.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Yes, thank you, President, Commissioner. Dear colleagues, at the end of this year, usually we take a look back and take stock of what has happened over the past months. 2017 was the year of progress made in our social Europe, and in particular with the proclamation of the social pillar. The efforts that have been made have to be continued because there is a lot of work ahead of us. We have to there's the coordination of social security regimes, we have to finish the work on the Posting of Workers Directive, and also there's the work-life balance and all the other challenges that surround the digital world. And obviously this is going to lead to new forms of employment, very different kinds of employment, and workers are going to have to develop their own skills in this area. So we've got education, training, vocational training, lifelong learning, access to new skills, and all of this has to keep pace with technological progress. This is absolutely essential. The digitalization of society and the workplace lead to an increase in the number of types of work and very diverse types of work, and what we need now is legal certainty. What kind of contract can we offer to these kind of workers? What kind of social protection can we guarantee them? We have to ensure that the kind of rules that we have for traditional work also apply to these new workers, this new category of workers, and this is important for the construction of the European Union.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ms. KUMPULA-NATRI for 1 minute, please. Thank you, President. Colleagues, last week Finland celebrated its 100th birthday. It's really a fairy tale. One of the poorest countries in Europe has become a very prosperous country during that period. It's something where there is genuine equality, there is free healthcare, there are creches for children, social protection for children. Everybody takes part in the growth. Now, with a right-wing government, my country is trying to deal with the question of applying best practices, levelling up, but Council doesn't seem to feel the same. Why should we be afraid of social investment, improving people's working and living conditions? The European Union needs a social pillar which is legally binding, because most Europeans don't see the European Union as something that actually protects and stands up for their rights. The social rights of European citizens are being trampled underfoot. Let's hope Gothenburg is a new departure. Thank you very much. Mr. Karas.
President, Commissioner Marianne THYSSEN, Outside this chamber, Paul Rübig and other Austrian members are passing on the Holy Flame of Bethlehem to the European Parliament. Here in the chamber, we're discussing with the Commissioner responsible the implementation of the social pillar in the European Union. Those two things really belong together. The social and economic cohesion is an essential prerequisite for peace in Europe. And a fairer Europe, a more competitive Europe, a Europe where the social dimension is being bolstered, that is part and parcel of our common, most important priorities. In Gothenburg, you could say that we were given a big big package, and in this package there are all sorts of things that need to be put together and assembled. What we've already managed is the social market economy can provide the backbone for what we're doing. We've already achieved social fundamental rights be made part of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. Now what we need to do is make sure that the specific social dimension be part and parcel of social policy in Europe, so that there's a balance struck between the different aspects to make sure that we see the social pillar as an important aspect. It is a present. Let us assemble it.
Thank you. That's the list of speakers ended, which brings us on to the Catch the Eye procedure. I've received 9 requests. I won't be able to accede to all of them because we are already behind schedule, so I'll accept one from each political group. And first of all, Ms. Šojdrová, 1 minute, please.
Děkuji za udělení slova, kolegyně a kolegové, paní komisařko. Pilíř sociální.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Commissioner, the social pillar reminds us of the existing protection of social rights in the European Union, and it provides new principles which are supposed to provide a response to new challenges. For example, guaranteeing a minimum income. Social policy remains in the hands of the member states, and obviously we are going to have to take account of different socio-economic situations across the member states. There's a great diversity across the member states. Protection of social rights for the citizens is a priority, but we have to balance the various interests. If we take a look at if we want to strengthen the social rights of workers, then we're going to have to consider new forms of enterprises and also look at things like crowdfunding, but that won't necessarily create new jobs. What we need is a political plan for the social area, and in my opinion, this may obviously be linked to reality.
Next speaker. Well, as I said, there's 5 colleagues down from the S&D group who would all like to speak during Catch the Eye. But my staff have informed me that they weren't actually all there throughout the whole debate. So, I'll give the floor to the first person who's down on the list and was there throughout the debate. And I'm working according to my colleagues. Ms. BEњOVÁ is the lucky winner, so you have the floor, madam.
Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner, colleagues. The implementation of the social pillar is one of the most important tasks that we have ahead of us during this legislature. The differences between the member states, unfortunately, do inhibit the promotion of social policy in various areas. Nobody questions the necessity to empower gender equality, but there's a sensitive topic that is very topical in various member states in the EU, is the general inequality in terms of the attitude of employers in many member states of the EU. Just as we did in the past support the directive of posting of workers, we expect a similar approach when it comes to doing away with vast differences between workers in various member states producing the same products in various member states for the same company, for the same employer. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Marias, 1 minute, please. Thank you, President. The implementation of the social pillar is vital for the European Union. We won't be able to carry on applying austerity. We need something which stops cutting people's wages and leaving more and more people unemployed and poor in Europe. We need to put an end to these neoliberal choices that have been made. We need to open the road to getting a genuine AAA Europe. We need to have a minimum wage, a proper unemployment benefit for people, and a European minimum income. We need to stop the hypocrisy and the crocodile tears that some have shed about this social pillar. There's a huge number of people in Europe living in social isolation and poverty. We need to do something about it. Thank you, says the President. Our next speaker is Mr. HADJIGEORGIOU for 1 minute, please. Thank you, President. In Cyprus, Madam Commissioner, there are companies and in other member states who are in trouble. We're possibly the only country in the EU without a national health system, and there are huge problems at the moment in that area. People who are ill wait for months to have examinations and tests which are vital for their health. The national health system, the health system that we have at the moment, despite the efforts of my party, is really struggling. The other day we had a group of visitors from Cyprus, and an elderly lady said that she lives on a €400 pension and she has to pay for her medicine, for her housing and her food out of that. What can I tell the citizens of my country when they ask whether Europe is really protecting their rights? The President, thank you, sir. I'm terribly sorry that I can't give the floor to all the other colleagues who wanted to do so, but there are people who are aware. They often are aware that there will be another chance perhaps to speak in a later debate, but we are running behind by at least 10 minutes, so I'll give the floor to Commissioner Thyssen. Go ahead, Madam.
Yeah? Thank you. Thank you very much, President. Dear members of Parliament, dear Presidency of the Council, let me thank you, first of all, for this vital debate. And let me continue, if you allow me, dear President, in my mother tongue, in Dutch, because I know we have here perfect interpretation services. The
proclamation of the European Pillar of Social Rights is, as we all know, a start. And it's certainly good that we're having a thorough debate on this, because we have to work on building social Europe here, and we need to discuss what the following steps need to be. And I see today's debate as the start of that particular debate. We've established some ambitious goals. I think that's clear. We said we want more convergence in Europe. We want convergence upwards. So that means better conditions for people to work in, better conditions for people to live in for our citizens. We also said that with this pillar, we need to adjust our institutions. We need to, well, let's call them social institutions. They need to be adapted to the conditions of the 21st century to make sure that we have a competitive, dynamic, but also inclusive market economy. That we have a social market economy being expanded enables us to allow more people to have better possibilities when it comes to training, education, lifelong learning and access to the labour market, when it comes to fair work conditions, when it comes to access to social security, social protection and appropriate, accessible basic services at a fair price. That shows our level of ambition. With all respect to the internal market, I mean, that is obviously a trump. That is something, a trump card that can really help us. Now, in the debate, we've heard a great deal, but I don't think it's rejecting subsidiarity. It's not trampling on the toes of the member states. Those who've said that, well, I'd like to ask you, please, why don't you read the preamble to the pillar? Look at points 17 and 18 in the recitals. You'll see very clear what the framework is that we agreed on. We need to implement that together. We're not changing the division of responsibilities at all, but it means that our responsibility is even greater. And I think that the European Pillar of Social Rights needs to, and that's why it was proclaimed, by the three institutions at the same time. We have to assume our responsibility where we have responsibility, and that's the work cut out for the future. There have been some comments made about the fact that the Commission doesn't know when it's dealing with economic issues what it wants in the social sphere and vice versa. Maybe I can tell you that we have very clearly decided at the start of this Commission about how we're going to approach this, including tax issues, budgetary issues, trade issues, and the way in which we deal with social partners. When it comes to the taxation, field of taxation, maybe I can point out many measures that have already been taken by my colleagues who have responsibility for taxation policy, Moscovici and others, supported, by the way, by the whole of the Commission, the policies that Mrs. Vestager has taken to make sure that we have fair taxes, that taxes won't be undermined or eroded. We're using the tools we have at our disposal. When it comes to budgetary policy, we said that we will be using, and we have indeed in this Commission already done this, we will be using a smart budgetary procedure. We'll be using the flexibility that is there in the Stability and Growth Pact, and we will look at and talk with the Member States to make sure that we're not going, that if we want to reduce spending, we need to make sure that there's a sustainable budget that we have. Let us not forget that if we don't have sustainable fiscal framework, we cannot have sustainable social expansion. And I think we need to look at the new trade agreements that have been concluded during this Commission. You'll see that there's a great deal more social aspects taken into consideration, aspects which, rightly so, are expected by our citizens in what we're doing. There's more transparency, and we're paying more attention to some issues that maybe were pushed into the margins previously. And when we're talking about the social partners and the social dialogue, perhaps I can point out that this Commission has undertaken immense measures, and will continue to do this, to relaunch the social dialogue, to improve capacity, build capacity in areas and member states where it needs to be built up to promote social dialogue. We're consulting with the social partners in many more areas than we need to pursuant to the treaty. We're happy to do that because the added value there for the design and the implementation of our policies is extremely clear. President, members of Parliament, President in Office of the Council, the proclamation of the pillar sends out a very clear signal. It's a signal of unity, it's a signal of hope, and it's a signal of action. Unity, because we in Europe know what we want to do together. We share and defend the same values, the values that we have proclaimed together. Our European Council, or the Council, with a mandate from all 28 member states and the other institutions as well, together with the Council, proclaimed this pillar. That's a sign that we are defending the same values. We now have to prove that we're doing that. And the responsibility for that rests on the shoulders of everybody who has signed up to this and proclaimed this. It's a sign of hope because it gives hope to those to see that who are concerned, because we can see that we're doing things, and if our policies work, then we can shape the future in a way that all people out there can count on, that changes that happen in society and in the economy are being accompanied by the policies that we've framed, and they and their children would have a decent future. It's a signal for action as well, because we've assumed responsibility together. This will give a boost to everybody to be able to act efficiently and effectively according to the words that we have all proclaimed. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I've heard and felt that there's support here in this chamber for what we're doing, and that will help us in implementing this pillar. Because when it comes down to it, it's a question of realising the pillar on the ground. We've promised a great deal, we have a great deal of plans, and we now have to work together and carry out all that we've promised. And if we do that, if we meet our promises and realise those, everybody working in their own areas, if we're all ambassadors for this pillar, then we can not fail. That is something that, as I said, is a beginning, it's a start. How it finishes, how it ends is up to us, but I'm extremely optimistic, President. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the Council, I turn to Mr. Maasikas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Commissioner, honourable members, I wish to thank you all for a very rich and timely debate. It is clearer than ever that the European Pillar of Social Rights is a widely supported initiative. It will bring about tangible improvements in the living and working conditions of our citizens, thanks to the engaged involvement of all stakeholders at all levels. When it comes to the implementation of the social pillar, account needs to be taken of the different starting positions and situations of the member states. The country-specific recommendations in the framework of the European semester offer essential instruments for ensuring that all member states strive towards the same goals. The European Pillar of Social Rights gives a solid embodiment to our common values within the EU. It is reassuring to note that there is a broad consensus across the Union and its institutions on these values. Thank you very much.
Σας ευχαριστώ. Η συζήτηση έληξε.
Thank you very much. That concludes the debate. The next item on our agenda is Council and Commission statements, Agenda 2030 and the Eurostat report called Monitoring Progress Towards Sustainable Development Goals in the European Union. On behalf of the Council, I turn again to Mr. Maasikas.